Shout out to today's sponsor of the Chris Johnston Show, Shady Rays. And I still don't understand how they're basically the same quality as the $200 sunglasses I used to buy. I'm not exaggerating. They feel every bit as premium as the expensive brands I've owned in the past. But the difference is I'm not stressing out over them. I wear Shady Rays everywhere, particularly when I'm driving to work and the sun is out. And life happens. These things are going to break. But if I drop them in the ocean, they can be replaced. If I knock them off the dock while I'm about to enter a boat, they replace them. Lost or broken, they send you a new pair with their new lost and broken protection. And these frames, the glasses, they're actually premium. Polarized lenses that cut glare, super clear optics, durable frames with solid hinges, clean classic styles that look sharp without trying too hard. And Shady Rays has over 300,000 five-star reviews and millions of people have switched. Go to shadyrays.com and grab a pair today. We've teamed up with them to give you this exclusive offer. Head to shadyrays.com and use the code SDP to get 40% off 2 or more pairs of polarized sunglasses. Try for yourself the shades rated 5 stars by over 300,000 people. That's shadyrays.com and use the code SDP to get 40% off 2 or more polarized sunglasses.
The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
All right, you've seen it already. The Toronto Maple Leafs will have the number 1 overall pick in this summer's NHL entry draft. Just like everyone predicted at the start of this week, CJ.
I mean, talk about a mood booster, right? I mean, just 180-degree turn from where we started the week to where it, really, I guess it was in a 24-hour window when you include the press conference that was, we hashed out on the Tuesday show, and then Tuesday night the Leafs win the draft lottery. Can't recall anything quite like it. I was looking around, like, historically, has there ever been a team that kind of bumbled and fumbled its way into the number 1 pick in this manner? I'm sure there is somewhere, but I couldn't find the perfect comparable, which, underlines where we're at. Some people, including maybe a little bit on this pod, but I don't think we were the loudest, were wondering why the Leafs weren't more actively tanking during the season once things went off the rails. They certainly didn't intentionally lose as many games as they did and end up finishing 28th overall. They had 8.5% odds when the draft lottery started of winning the number 1 pick. After 2 balls were selected, those odds had dropped to 4.5, and they hit the perfect numbers on the last 2 balls to win the pick. And certainly, it changes everything, at least from a perception standpoint, about the new front office. And I know it has literally nothing to do with them. They weren't in charge when the team had the record it did, and obviously they have no impact over what happens in the draft lottery. But, it does shift momentum around, I think, the way that people are viewing the front office, about the prospects for this team. It's a bit of a lifeline for them. You know what I mean? I don't think by any means we should frame this number 1 overall pick as saving the franchise or anything like that. But it really does. They were staring down the very real possibility that they weren't going to have a first round pick in this draft, that they would give a 6th or 7th pick to Boston, that they likely wouldn't have one next year to Philadelphia. And, they're trying to pivot on a dime. And all of a sudden now you have the number 1 overall pick. You're going to bring in a highly, highly skilled player who has the ability probably to play for your team next year. And, I just think it does give them a few more options than they would have had if they didn't get that stroke of luck.
Is there really a debate over who the Leafs should be picking first overall? It should be Gavin McKenna, right?
I mean, I think that's where they're going to land. It's the job. Obviously the amateur scouts for the Leafs have been meeting all year and doing the normal process throughout a season to get their list in order. But, now that John Chaika and Matt Sundin are there, I'm sure they're going to have to go through that process again, specific to the top 4 or 5 players with the group of defensemen you have, plus Ivor Stenberg and Gavin McKenna. But, ultimately, I believe you're going to land on McKenna. He's been sort of the consensus choice for a long time, put up ridiculous numbers in the Western Hockey League before going and playing his draft season in the NCAA at Penn State. Sometimes I think those those players that are scrutinized for so long, either people start to really nitpick their games to a degree that isn't normal. And then it is natural. Obviously, there's other great players around the world. I'm not fronting myself as a draft expert here by any stretch of the imagination. But,
neither of us are.
Yeah. But I just feel like ultimately he's got to be the guy. I mean, the one thing we have to recognize in the NHL, it's impossible to get the highest skilled players in their 20s through any other means than the draft. I mean, that's just the way it is these days. And then, of course, the hard part is you can have a season like the Vancouver Canucks had, and I'm not picking on them, but they fell to 3 in this draft lottery. And this actually looks like the kind of draft where they might still end up with the sort of player I'm talking about. But each pick beyond 1, the odds drop significantly that you're going to get like a special player. And obviously there's lots of exceptions to the rule. There's Nikita Kucherov's drafted in the 2nd round and things like that over time. But I mean, by and large, the absolute best players in the league are taken in the number 1 slot. I think it's kind of self-explanatory as to why. And so I think regardless of positional need or, I understand that people want to do the conversation. Should the Leafs trade down and get a defenseman? Like I think that's just more podcast / talk radio talk than reality. I mean, the last time the number 1 overall pick was traded in the NHL, I believe was 2003. There's a reason for that. And having that selection, being able to take the absolute best player, I mean, there's marketing aspects to it. I just think that you figure it out later. Yes, the Leafs need to rebuild their blue line, but passing on, someone with the offensive upside of a Gavin McKenna, I just can't see them ultimately doing that once they go through their process.
So you don't want to debate for the next 20 minutes about why the Leafs should trade the number 1 overall pick? I had 20 minutes of notes.
I'm open to conversation about it. Like I'm not sitting here saying you can't look, even, John Chaika, I'm sure will have conversations with the other GMs to see what might be on the table. Like, look, they control this pick until late June, right? They got 6-7 weeks, whatever it is, to go through the exercise of considering all the options. I just think the option that will always make the most sense is going to the podium with the first selection, taking the best player with the highest ceiling, and, changing your organization almost immediately. And what's funny is that this doesn't, to me, necessarily impact next year's Leafs that much. I mean, I would expect that someone like Gavin McKenna is going to play in the NHL and is going to be a good rookie. But, what it does is I think it shifts the window forward in a different way, because the conversation, obviously, with this team, like a lot of the teams that have been going for it, is they don't have enough young assets. Well, now you do still have Matthew Nyes, who wasn't traded at the deadline. Obviously, there was conversations. You have Easton Cowan, who's maybe not on the same level. And then you have potentially your future, top featured forward in Gavin McKenna coming in the door, most likely. I should caveat that. I mean, maybe it's Stenberg, but the point is you've now got something to move forward with. If you can't in short order get this team back to being immediately competitive. And while last year was certainly a difficult season in Toronto, you didn't have to suffer the way some teams suffered. I guess it's a different kind of suffering when you're the Leafs last year. You start the season trying to be a playoff team. You get through October somewhere around 500. So like you're not doing great, but it's still in the air. Frankly, remember they had a winning streak right before the Olympic break. There was still a window in January and February. If you really wanted to twist your neck and look at it, there was a window for the Leafs to have the kind of finish like the Flyers did, for example, and charge into the playoffs. Obviously nothing close to that happened. They went the precise other direction, but they were relevant in semi-playoff conversations for most of the season. And then it's a terrible last month, but you end up with this pick. Whereas, in some markets like Vancouver, it never got good this year. And, look, the 3rd overall pick could maybe be the best one. I mean, everyone's pointing to that Cale Makar draft when Colorado at that time lost 3 lotteries from the worst selection, dropped to 4th, and ended up with a generational defenseman. So, I mean, I recognize you could still end up in a good spot, but, the Leafs fell into this pick. There's no way around that. They don't need to apologize for it, and nor would I expect them to, but it's a great position for them to be in today, especially with all the tumult that came with the end of their season, and obviously the hiring of the new front office.
Hold your fire on anything Vancouver, because I do want to get to the Canucks and who could potentially be their next GM. That's definitely a topic we're going to get into on today's podcast. Also, I just want to say, like, for the Leafs with Gavin McKenna, there are already people who thought they galaxy brained this entire process with who the GM is and who's in their front office. They need not galaxy brain picking the first overall pick. It really should be Gavin McKenna. It really should be him. He's shown the most talent. He's been the presumptive number one overall pick for months now. Like, don't mess this up. There's
already 72 McKenna sweaters popping up around town, which is like, I mean, you're in a hockey market when. I'm not saying that wouldn't happen elsewhere, but I mean, it was quite something. Honestly, this will sound insane because it's a lottery, right? So there was 11 teams that could have won the first overall pick the way the rules work. But I never really considered it, I guess. I guess so much was going on. They name the front office officially on Sunday night. We have that Monday press conference. It's pretty, spectacular. We've been over that. You go into the draft lottery and just the odds were stacked against them. So I didn't really consider it. And then even when it went to the last ball, like the Leafs at that point, there was 11 potential balls still that could come out. They had one winning ball. It had to be number 12. So
Vancouver had 3.
Yeah. So, I mean, and this has worked against the Leafs in the past. I mean, this is going way back, but when it was the McDavid lottery and it got to the last ball, the Leafs actually had the most potential winning combinations, but obviously Edmonton got it. So, I mean, this is sort of, it's a lottery. Like, by definition, last year the Islanders won it from the 10th last spot. Like, they moved up a huge amount to get Matthew Schaefer. So, it's not unprecedented, but I just had never really, probably with everything going on, I had never put my mind to the, what if the Leafs won? And then all of a sudden you're watching it and it's like, oh wow, the Leafs won. And that's where, and you see the excitement our SDP brethren had and others, live streaming the reaction. O-Dog had a pretty funny reaction in the TSN studios.
How dare Steve Dangle and Adam Wilde and Jesse Blake, 3 men who are near 40 years old, how dare they celebrate their favorite team winning a draft lottery, CJ? Shouldn't they, just
act their age?
Shouldn't they not cheer for teams? Shouldn't they be caring about their families?
I would actually encourage them not to act their age. The longer they can hold on to the joy that sports brings and that's the better.
I understand if you're a fan of a different team and you are not happy that the Toronto Maple Leafs won the draft lottery. That is totally fine. That is in the name of fandom. But for people online who are looking at what they're doing and be like, oh, grow up. This is how you celebrate the draft lottery. Give me a break. Shut up. All right. I don't want to hear this grandstanding over how you should celebrate a draft lottery or something going on. And I get it. It is the Leafs. This is not a team that is starving in any way. But I don't want to see people who I know if the shoe was on the other foot would celebrate just as crazily as they did say stuff like that.
Right. And look at if you, the thing is, there's not as much animus out there for them, but if you want to get really upset, San Jose's had a pretty good run of picks here and they moved up quite a bit to get to number 2. The process, we've been over this, from the tanking end of it. The process is always going to be kind of flawed. I don't think there is a perfect way. A lot of people weren't happy when Edmonton got 4 first overall picks in 6 years either. And obviously they didn't hit on a lot of them until they did. And then they got McDavid. And 1 year they didn't have number 1. They got Leon Draisaitl, and that changed the entire sort of scope of their franchise for the last decade. So I don't really know the solution other than, I guess, if everyone was a free agent entering the league and they could sign wherever they want, but then we'd probably be complaining because all the big city, big money teams would probably be the ones getting those players anyway. So look, it's a distribution of talent is tough. The league is truly trying to spread it around because they don't want any one team to be too bad. They kind of don't want any one team to be too great either. I think it's sort of part of the system that's in place in NHL. But yeah, the Leafs, they got a lucky bounce. Chaika called it that right away. He's like, sometimes you need some luck, and it was on our side tonight. Called it fortuitous. And now, I mean, the great thing is, if you're a front office, it's funny. It's like Matthew Darche last year, right? He had just been hired as the Islanders general manager. They win the first overall pick. Turns out Matthew Schaefer, I think, was even better than most of us expected. Like, it really, it gives you something to start your kind of tenure with. That's like, wow, that's where the Leafs are, but they still have a lot of work to do. And, I think that there's still some challenges directly in their face, but big picture, how better to frame this gives them clarity on what they're doing. Because now we know for sure they don't own their 27 pick. They don't know their 28 pick. Both of those are completely unprotected. So, I mean, there can be no discussion about intentionally not being good in those years, because, potentially that could be a first overall pick to one of either Boston or Philadelphia if the Leafs were to be in the lottery again. And so I think it really clarifies that you've got to do everything you can to be competitive at least the next 2 seasons. And I would expect they're going to behave that way now that they get into this offseason.
Let's discuss arguably the biggest challenge, potentially a challenge or a hurdle, no matter how you want to describe it, for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Auston Matthews, still going off of your reporting from earlier this week about the uncertainty of his future with the team. Does this team having the number 1 overall pick change his potential outlook with this team?
It doesn't. And, I'm going to call it the biggest unknown for the Leafs, because they can't say with certainty that he'll be back. I mean, obviously, I guess there's some comfort knowing he signed. It's not like we're talking about a free agent situation, but, there's still, on Austin's end, I think that he's still working through a process where he's not sure what's best for him just yet. And he's got a lot to consider. And while 100%, like winning the lottery, there's no negative downside to that. Like, it's great news for the organization. I'm sure Austin is happy about that, but what it doesn't necessarily change is, can the Leafs win the Stanley Cup next year? And, I look at right now, Leo Carlsson's having a great run through the playoffs for the Anaheim Ducks. Like, he is the guy. He's at the end of his 3rd season in the league. Like, he was drafted in 2023 and he's right on time. Like, I'm not being critical of Carlsson, but the truth is, even the top draft picks tend to take a couple years before they're making a real impact. They're useful players in their first year, maybe second year, but it isn't until you get towards the end of the entry level where they're kind of become game breakers. Now, there's been some exceptions to the rule. I'd argue Macklin Celebrini's been an exception to that rule, hitting over 100 points as a teenager, nominated right now for the Ted Lindsay Award as one of the league's most outstanding players, voted by his peers. You can't expect that. I think even with someone as highly touted as Gavin McKenna, like, I think that it's fair to assume there's a bit of a learning curve there. And so, I'm just bringing it back to the fact that while it's amazing news and there's no downside here, I don't know that there's necessarily the immediate upside that you'd hope for necessarily if you're, on Matthew's side of things. And really, I think we're at the same place today, Julian, that we were when we talked about this a few days ago, in that, the Leafs have to make their roster better for next season. And he's going to want to see what they do before making any declarations either way. And so that hasn't changed. The mood around the team's changed. It's a good story, but, I think that Auston, he's only got 2 years till he's potential free agent, and, he's the captain of the team. He's obviously an important part of what they do, but I think he wants some confidence that in those 2 years, they're going to be able to be extremely competitive the way they have been for most of his time as a member of the Maple Leafs, and things fell off pretty significantly last year. So, he's going to, I think we're going to be talking about this into July still. I don't think anything's going to change between then and now. And so I know it's unpopular to talk about. I know some Leaf fans don't want to hear it, but right now the absolute truth, and I can tell you with, strong sourcing on this, is that, he needs time to think about things, and he's just not totally sure what's best for his future and whether that lies with the Leafs. And in the meantime, it definitely creates a little bit of uncertainty. It creates a little more pressure, I think, for the front office to, make good on what their intentions would be anyway. But, you kind of have to show some, it's not just about having a good plan. There's got to be some execution there in terms of making acquisitions, making some smart trades or signings, whatever it ends up being to put the Leafs in a better spot. But, you're not going to hear him come out and say, unless there's a change of mind between now and before, the draft or before July 1st, that he's 100% back. I mean, I think that the team and the front office needs to show him something before we basically find out how he's going to proceed here.
Is it is it going to have to be a situation where John Chaika will have to just be creative with a trade? Just look at the quality of free agents. Not saying they're all bad, but we're not looking at there have been other star-studded or more star-studded free agent classes is what I'm trying to say. And you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what it looks like on paper this summer.
It does, but I'll tell you this, we don't have the headline names. Like there's no way around that. But I think there's more useful players that are available in free agency this year than maybe, everyone's aware of. Like I look at the blue line, and this is just off the top of my head, but you've got Darren Radish coming off a 70-point season, a right shot defenseman in Tampa.
At 30.
And he's 30. I mean, look, I'm not saying there's not risk because it's not going to be a cheap contract. This is free agency. This is the cap just got set officially at $104 million. There's a lot of money out there. And I would suspect if he hits the open market, he's going to get an eye-popping contract. But I'm just saying he's available. Rasmus Anderson, I'm not sure he's leaving Vegas, but he's, as of now, a pending UFA July 1st. You've got John Carlson. You've got Jacob Trouba. Some of these guys are older. Again, there's risk always in free agency, but I do think there's more useful players. Alex Tuck playing in the second round right now at the Buffalo Sabres is available at forward. For a team like the Leafs, they're looking to fill in around the margins in a sense. I mean, the blue line, I guess, is another issue. There's also the trade market too. And one thing that comes out of getting this number 1 overall pick with McKenna is it may change your view if you're John Chaika about what do you do with someone like a Matthew Nyes. And I don't know, I don't know where they're going to land on that. I don't think they know. I mean, it's still day 3 on their day 4 on the job or whatever it is. They're still figuring out their staff and still have a decision to make on Craig Berube's future. And, there's a lot going on right now with the Leafs, but, I think they have to decide, does that make you more likely to maybe be willing to move forward? Knowing you have another younger one coming or not. Maybe you want to keep together this idea of a younger core, a second kind of core that's coming along. There's a lot to process here, but I think that there are definitely ways that we can expect them to improve the roster. I think the blue line is the most obvious, especially now that you're going to add someone like McKenna most likely, or even Stenberg, even if we want to entertain it as one or the other. Those are guys that are going to play next year for your team on an entry-level deal on by definition, a cheap contract. So, that's a benefit too. Maybe you're not chasing another forward right now and it gives you more to deploy on the blue line. So, I don't know which way they're going to go yet, but without question, the Leafs need to turn some things over. The future of Morgan Riley is pretty pressing, who has a no movement clause. So if they're trading him, it's not as easy of a move as it might be, but, there's ways I think for them to come out of, for us to be sitting here on July 5th and looking at their roster and be like, okay, yeah, this looks like a better team. I think they also would hope for better health. And then there's still a coaching piece to this. Do they bring back Berube? Do they try to go chase someone like Bruce Cassidy or another coach that might be available? I think there's ways to improvement and there's ways maybe to make Auston feel like, yeah, okay, I'm still down with this. And, I don't know which way it's going to go. I think some people might have misinterpreted the reporting just because of, I know how important this guy is to the fan base and to the city and the franchise. But the truth is the facts are still the facts. He's waiting until July to decide, and he's not sure which way it's going to go yet. I think it's truly kind of a 50-50 kind of proposition, depending on what we see, unfold here in the next 7 or 8 weeks.
Okay, we'll have to keep an eye on that as it unfolds. The last Leafs question I have before we conclude our extended Leafs corner for the week, can you just explain how the 2027 and the 2028 first round picks will be, I guess, kind of divvied up for the Leafs? So while I do this, you might as well go make a pot of coffee, take a walk, take the dog out. Because I could speak on it for 20 minutes. It's a complex topic. I think the simplest way to understand it, Julian, hello, paging Julian McKenzie. I was actually going to go make a coffee, CJ. I was kidding.
Well, unless you need one. I was kidding. But the simplest way, without getting too bogged down and to explain this, is that the Leafs made 2 trades on the same day, March 7th, 2025. You'll remember the trades well. They were all in. This was last season. They brought in Scott Laughton first from Philadelphia, and they brought Brandon Carlo in from Boston following that in that order, which is important. The Philadelphia trade was made first that day. Effectively, there was 2 IOUs included in those trades, which are first round picks, and they had conditions attached to them. And the problem right now is that there's a bit of overlap in the way those could be interpreted. And I'm not going to go into all reading through it because I think I'll lose too many people, and maybe I can jump to the end first. The league is not ready to decide which way this goes. The league's not yet ready to declare which goes where. But my understanding is it's highly likely that Philadelphia, because they made the first trade effectively, will get the 2027 first round pick of the Leafs, and Boston will get the 2028 first round pick of the Leafs. Both of those don't have any, once they're awarded, they won't have any conditions on them. Now, the Leafs did put top 10 protection on the deal they made with the Flyers in 2027, which is sort of interesting. And I think it's possible the league doesn't rule until we see what happens next year to see if that ends up in the top 10. But yeah, it's a strange set of circumstances. You could read it that the Leafs should, if next year's pick is top 10, you could read it that they should be able to decide if Philadelphia gets that pick or Boston gets that pick. And that would be pretty fascinating because I think they could turn that, having that power over the process into another asset, right? You could make it so that you say to both those teams, hey, if you want this pick, we need to make another trade. And who's going to give us the best pile of stuff to make us say it's you? I don't know that they're going to get that opportunity though, because my understanding is the league is leaning towards giving the Flyers that pick just outright, no matter where the Leafs finish. But it remains to be seen how that plays out. Now, this isn't so much a concern from the Toronto end. I mean, at this point, if you're the Leafs, you know you don't have your next 2 first-round draft picks. It's more potentially of interest if you're the Bruins or the Flyers, depending on how you view the Leafs' chances, because they're both going to end up with a pretty good lottery ticket here. I think the Leafs are going to operate where they expect to be better than the next 2 years, but it's not a guarantee. It's hockey. I mean, once upon a time that the Ottawa Senators held a unprotected first round pick of the San Jose Sharks, coming off that era where San Jose was great and was in it every year. And that pick became Tim Stützle, right? It was the 3rd overall pick they got. So, we've seen this happen over time. But it's the NHL still has to adjudicate it. They haven't made a decision. And Bill Daly did speak to some of our colleagues, including Stephen Wino and David Alter at the draft lottery on Tuesday. And he basically said, my answer is I'm not going to answer this yet. He's like, it's a confusing situation. It's a complicated situation. We'll make more time. We'll make a ruling if we have to, cause that's the other side of this. Just to quickly, before we move on, if the Leafs pick next year isn't top 10, there's no real debate. Like if the Leafs own the 15th overall pick next year, it just goes to Philadelphia, and then Boston gets 2028 with no conditions. It's more interesting if Toronto's in the draft lottery next year, because both teams might fight to want to have that ticket and be leaning on the conditions in the trades. And someone's going to have to make a decision at Central Registry from the NHL if that's the case.
Okay, let's move on to the Vancouver Canucks. Can you give us a read on that front office situation? We've seen all these different names kind of thrown around as a potential successor for Patrick Allvin, who's no longer in the GM chair in Vancouver. Pierre Dorian's name has been thrown around. Ryan Bonus, who actually used to work for Pierre Dorian once upon a time in Ottawa, also being thrown around. I've seen Martin Madden's name, who's part of the Anaheim Ducks front office. Like, where are we at with the Vancouver Canucks, and who could be in the GM chair?
Well, they're inching towards the finish line of a decision here. And I think what's interesting is Jim Rutherford did come out this week and tell reporters that he's going to be stepping aside definitively. He said as of after the draft. I think it could even happen sooner depending on how this process goes. And what the Canucks haven't said is, are they replacing him as a president? And so are they hiring a GM and president, or is this a one-shot deal? And I do think that distinction is important. I think Ryan Johnson, who's been discussed as an AGM in Vancouver and put together the team in Abbotsford that won the Calder Cup recently, remains in that mix. Ryan Bonus, you've heard his name for good reason. I understand he's been there and had some face-to-face time with ownership and been very well part of the process. The same as Pierre Dorian. Now, there was a real pushback from elements of the fan base to that idea. And so Martin Madden, as you mentioned, like these names are all there, but I don't it's hard to know exactly where they're going to go. This is the Canucks. It's ownership is very involved in the decision too. So it's obviously what they decide here is a big bearing on where things go. It's a sort of transitionary time for the organization, and Rutherford's stepping right out. I mean, that wasn't always necessarily going to be the case, but he's not planning to live in Vancouver next year. He's going to plan on being advisor to ownership, being a sounding board for the new front office, but he's not going to have his hands in the day-to-day operations. So, it's a big decision, and it's one that I think they have to make in relatively short order with the combine coming and everything that the hockey calendar features in June. But that's to the best of my knowledge where we're at. I wouldn't sleep on the idea of Ryan Bowness getting that job, but ultimately it kind of keeps bringing me back to, you have Johnson in the organization. I know he's well thought of. Do you maybe elevate him to the GM's chair and then bring in a president or something above him and do that? I mean, I could see it breaking that way, but until they make their decision, we're all just kind of piecing together snippets of information, knowing who's been there for meetings and things like that, and trying to basically construct what makes the most sense for the Canucks.
Seeing the Canucks fall to 3 in the draft lottery, like, I get it. Like, it's happened so many other times before where if you have the best odds, you still don't end up with the first overall pick. But is it fair to say disappointment reigns supreme in Vancouver, considering how the ping pong balls fell?
It might. I think because they've never won the draft lottery in their entire history. So it's not just this one year. It's seeing a team like the Leafs get it 10 years after they got Auston Matthews. And if you want to be real long view thinking, it's 40 years after they got the pick that became Wendell Clark first overall. But, even the Leafs have had a few cracks at number one. Obviously, another number of other organizations have had multiple first overall picks. And in that whole time, you haven't had that. And, the Canucks have kind of been lost at sea for a decade. I mean, that's a charitable way to put it. They obviously 2 years ago got to Game 7 of the second round too. So they've had some high moments. They had a pretty good run in the bubble too, back in the COVID playoffs. But, there's been a lot of twists and turns, and I think it's fair to say, openly embraced having the best odds to pick number one overall. But even while doing that, I mean, to me, it's a positive of the NHL system that, they still pick 3, which is certainly not nothing. They could get a great player there. I would expect they're going to get a very good player at minimum there. But you can't guarantee yourself the first overall pick. I mean, this is why the system's in place. What's interesting to me is if we assume, and it's dangerous to assume because San Jose has so many other young players and they hold the second pick, but in a world where if McKenna and Stenberg go 1-2 in some order, do the Canucks dive into the attractive defensive options, the Chase Reeds and the like, Verhoff, or do they go with Caleb Malhotra, who's got the potential certainly to be a top line center? Obviously, his father Manny is the head coach in Abbotsford, their American Hockey League team, is seen as a possible candidate to actually coach the Canucks, I think, at some point. Or is the family connection a positive or negative, or how do they view that? How do they navigate that? That would be an interesting call. I mean, and the truth of the matter is Vancouver right now needs everything. Like, yes, they need help down the middle, but they also need stout defenders. I mean, they're a couple years away from being a couple years away organizationally right now. Now they've started to accumulate prospects and the things you need, but they need a lot more of it. And I think we're going to be talking with this team having a chance to win next year's draft lottery as well when it comes around.
One more draft lottery thought. We kind of mentioned them a little earlier, but the San Jose Sharks, once again, being in the top 3, once again, getting another opportunity, getting a high pick. Like, I don't hold whatever resentment people may have for a team like San Jose getting a high pick like that. Like, look, if you suck, or if you're not in a good position to get yourself into the playoffs, like the lottery is the way to do it. That's just how the ping pong balls drop. Like, well,
Chicago has number 4 as well, right? Like, we're seeing those two teams though seem to be picking at the top every year, like again and again and again and again. Eventually, you expect them to be out of that conversation. Right.
My point is just it's a lot of draft picks, a lot of good players starting to accumulate in San Jose, and I'm really curious what could be up Mike Greer's sleeve entering the draft.
Well, he has options, right? Because they have very they have almost no defenseman signed for next year. So, whether it's free agency, trade, they got to add some like blue liners for next year, just to straight up. But obviously he's got a lot of prospects now, and he's got this pick. I mean, I'm sure he'll consider calls on the number 2 pick because it could be pretty valuable. Ultimately, I don't know if we'll see him trade it, but like maybe one of the other prospects or something like that could be traded at some point. I mean, they've started to accumulate NHL talent too. We saw them make the Kiefer Sherwood deal this year and then extend him. Obviously Celebrini, he's only 2 years into a 3-year entry-level deal, but he can be extended as of July 1st. And that's going to be a whopper of a contract whenever they end up signing it. But, they're ready to start. You got to crawl before you walk and before you run. Like, I think they've moved out of the crawling stage. I mean, even last year now granted it was partly due to the playoff format, but they were into the playoff mix, right? They had a chance down the stretch if they had gotten hot at the end of the year to sneak into one of those spots. And then the beauty of that is they got a taste of kind of, we'll call it a playoff race. And then they're adding another high-end player. Everybody else gets a year older. All the guys they've already picked, the Misas and Will Smith and, so many players through that roster. I mean,
Eklund.
Eklund. They're in a really compelling position. I mean, at some point we're going to be talking about a long San Jose Sharks playoff run again. I mean, it just seems inevitable, but there is still some work to be done. And so, you saw Mike Greer really deadpan the reaction. Like if you contrasted like when Matt Sundin, his reaction to when the Leafs won the 1 pick and when Mike Greer and the Sharks won the 2nd pick, it'd be pretty funny. But his focus is, don't get me wrong, it's awesome. It's exciting. It's great for the Sharks organization, but I think his focus is way more on, not just adding this player that they're going to at number 2, but really building out the rest of that program because they have the foundation in place, or you can start to see, like, you almost start to think like, how's anyone going to beat them for 10 years? But I mean, hockey doesn't work that way. And obviously not everyone hits their potential and just things will happen along the way, but they're in a great spot after, some painful years there for the Sharks.
Any other lingering draft lottery thoughts before I ask you one more question before we get to Ask CJ?
I feel bad for Calgary. They fall down to 6. Again, it is a deep draft, so you're going to get a player you like there, but that's a team it just feels like they've never won number 1 either. I don't think, have they?
Nope. They've never had the number 1 overall pick. They've never drafted in the top 3 of the NHL draft.
There you go. So never even picking top 3. Obviously, they traded a lot of NHL players at the door this year between Anderson, Kadri, McKenzie, Uyghur, and the like. So it's looking like a rebuild, even if they're not using that word. And they could have really used the boost of a number 1 pick, and they didn't get it. So with the new building coming and everything happening in Calgary, I don't want to be too down. I still think you get a good player at number 6, but if they won 1 or 2, it's just a different feel for that organization. And so only 2 teams can win those spots, but there's a few there that haven't had the embarrassment of riches in terms of previous drafts that had really difficult seasons. And, that's how the lottery balls fall.
Yeah, even if they got Stenberg at 2 or something like that.
Oh, yeah. Are you kidding?
It would make such a difference for that franchise. They still need that elite, like, superstar home run pick. They have a lot of good young players. They just need that 1 or 2. They just need a high grade A+ guy up top.
You need hope, man. And I'm not saying they're completely without it, but like getting a 1 or 2 pick is it's a hit of hopium for every fan base. It's good for organization. Like, there's nothing bad about it, right? The fact the Leafs are already somehow these McKenna jerseys floating around, like, it just tells you, right? And look at the Leafs have had a good 10-year run on, tons of wins. If you've been a Leafs fan, you could have bought a Marner, Matthews, or Nylander jersey and felt good about it for the last 10 years, really, for the most part. And I'm just saying they've had a lot of that in their organization. So, it's tough for some others that just haven't had quite that. But as I say, I just think this is the system. I don't really know what more. There's no way to say like what's fair and what's not. I mean, it's all left to chance, and chance produced what it did.
Okay, here's the one question I wanted to ask before we get to Ask CJ, which we know we normally do on Mondays. We'll take a couple questions. We weren't able to get to it on the Monday because there was so much other things going on. I mentioned the UFA class. Evgeny Malkin is an unrestricted free agent coming this summer. At least he's slated to be. What do you think he'll do next? Do you think he stays in Pittsburgh? Do you think he moves on somewhere else? Do you think he retires? I'm curious what you think about his situation.
He's not retiring. We can rule that option out right now. And, still had a pretty good season at age 39, 60-ish points, pretty much point per game guy. And, he wants to play and he wants to play for the Penguins. Where it's interesting is it's just not entirely clear on the Penguins end. Are they ready to move forward, kind of start turning the page on that previous era or not? And, Kyle Dubas has been pretty non-committal about it. Certainly not closing the door to the possibility, but, they intentionally didn't want those discussions to happen in a meaningful way during the season. They wanted to get to this point now. And basically it's time for Malkin and his camp and the Penguins to have a hard conversation. And that might lead to a 1-year extension or maybe not. But, it's very clear Malkin himself is going to be playing in the NHL next season. So, it's a hard one to read still at this early stage because nothing is happening directionally to say what is or isn't going to happen. It's kind of funny, Julian. A couple of years ago, I think it was 3 years ago, the Penguins sort of flirted with the same thing. It was, different front office. Maybe it was 4 years ago. Yeah, 4 years ago, I guess. Ron Hextall and when Brian Burke was the president. And they went right down to the wire thinking they weren't going to bring Malcolm back. And ultimately, they made a decision just before July 1st and extended him, and they extended Chris Letang at the same time, and they kept the band together. And so, it's not exactly a new thought in the organization, but I think sometimes your history can be like, your history is great. They got 3 banners up there, Stanley Cup banners, and a lot of great memories from obviously the Malkin, Crosby, Letang, Fleury years, whoever else you want to graft onto that. But, they are trying to turn the page to some degree too. And, Sidney Crosby still remains the heartbeat of their team, but, how you handle these guys, it's not easy necessarily how you handled that. And so I think that's where we're at with Malkin. But I fully expect to see him either playing for the Penguins or trying to haunt the Penguins. That's kind of how he is. Like, you can see it's been emotional for him. You can see in his public comments that he's wanted them to sort of more embrace him, more say like, yeah, you're back. You're still playing well, Gino. And, that hasn't yet happened. I don't think I don't want anyone to jump to the conclusion he's leaving, but it's certainly not for sure that he's staying at this point.
Okay. And now it's time to get to Ask CJ. We know people sent in questions earlier this week. We finally have time to get to them. Here's one from Zahid to both of you. If you were a GM, would you consider trading the first overall pick in any draft? So not specific to this one. If you were a GM and you had the number 1 overall pick, would you consider trading it?
Probably not. I just think it's too valuable in like, there's conditions, I guess I would make it sometimes make sense. But for the most part, I just think controlling, like, the league gives you control of a player for 7 years, the first 7 years of his career, the first 3 years at contracts that can only, even if you hit all the bonuses, can only hit 4 million. And most players don't hit those bonuses. So most of them are more like 1 to 2 million a year. Like, there's, in a cap world, controlling a player with that much skill at that age and keeping the contracts at a pretty reasonable amount, I think that's worth a lot more than this sort of immediate gratification you might get from trading, for an established star. Now, if Edmonton phoned the Leafs and said, well, you give us a first overall pick for Connor McDavid, I think that's a different conversation, but I also don't expect Edmonton or any team like that to do that with that level of talent. So I just think ultimately I wouldn't lean towards ever trading a first overall pick because of the way the system works right now. If we had real free agency, right? Like if like amazing players at age 24 were available to the whole league, I think I would view it differently, but we still in the NHL, we don't have as much movement. I'm not even commenting on whether that's good or not. That's just a fact. And so since it's so hard to get those high end talents, I would think I would opt to draft the best one each year if I had the number 1 pick.
I would lean towards keeping it unless the player I would get at the other end of a trade would replicate or surpass the impact expected of that number 1 overall pick. That is your opportunity to draft elite talent. at that position. And I'm a guy who I think best player available in the draft, and you try to do less of picking for need at that spot, he could change my franchise. I don't know if I want to go away from that. That's what I think.
Plus the marketing side and stuff too. Like, I mean,
yeah.
And that isn't like, it might not be something fans are actively thinking about, but like having a player to build your team around, build your program around. I mean, that's normally what these number one overall players are. I know there's a few from recent memory that didn't become that type of guy, but for the most part, that's where players, these number one picks, even the ones that aren't the absolute top of the number one class, are still like, they become like Nico Hischier, right? Like they become like players that are really, really important to good teams. So, I just think it's tough to pass that up, man.
Richard wants to know, at the end of the Vegas Anaheim series, do John Tortorella and Cutter Gauthier shake hands?
Yes, because there's too much class in our game. I think that's the whole point of the handshake. Is there's obviously a lot that goes on the ice. In some cases, maybe off the ice, there can be hate or something resembling hate, and then there can be respect at the end of a hard-fought battle. So I'm going to guess yes, that even despite problems that may have existed in Philadelphia, I actually don't know to what degree Tortorella would be blamed for that by Gauthier or his camp, but I still think no matter what it was, that they will shake hands ultimately once the final buzzer sounds on that series.
I wonder, and I haven't seen, but I wonder if John has been asked that question about Cutter Gauthier. And I bet, I don't know John that well, but just having seen enough of his press conferences, I'm pretty sure he would shoot that down rather fast.
It's funny because when William Karlsson, returned to the series after his long exit, I saw Tortorella address that because Karlsson was in the Columbus organization. Tortorella was the coach, of course, years ago when he was exposed in the expansion draft and drafted by Vegas and immediately scored 40 goals. And John said, he was like, what did I do wrong? Basically, he said that he called Karlsson after that season to be like, what did I miss? Or was this me or what? I thought that was kind of a funny exchange. And I hadn't thought myself of the tie between those two until I saw that question asked in Vegas.
Chris Thorne wants to do an LA Kings corner. What are we hearing about a new coach? How are they going to improve the defense? When we get quotes like, I don't think I got anything wrong, in reference to a comment that went viral from Ken Holland a couple of days ago.
It's a process, man. I can tell you DJ Smith is part of the coaching search that they're having there. So, it's possible you end up right where you started with the head coach. And I think the Kings are in a difficult spot where obviously they've lost Kopitar now. And that's not someone any team could just replace in any easy fashion. You've got a pretty aging core. You made the deal for Panarin and extended him 2 years. I think they're going to be still on a track towards trying to be competitive. Like I don't see an intentional rebuild starting or anything like that. And so, they've got a lot to sell, and that they're still Los Angeles, like still I think an attractive destination, but it's going to be a challenging offseason there for Ken Holland. And I think they're going to be active on the trade market and in free agency and just build their team out that way. But I don't think there's a magic fix unless they're willing to get to, really trading things around, or, I'm sure that they would love one of the marquee players, centermen out there that can become free agents in 2 years. But I don't know if that's going to happen. And then if we ever get to a point where we're talking about, say, an Auston Matthews trade, does he want to go there? Is there other places he would want to go more? He would have control. There's no movement clause. What do the Kings have to trade back? I mean, all those things become real issues and that kind of thing. And I don't think the Kings are that well positioned to win out on one of those potential deals that we're not even sure if those players even will ever hit the market. But if they do, I don't know that LA would be considered by me anyway as one of the favorites. I look at teams like Utah or Anaheim, or there's even San Jose. There's other places that they have more future assets that could be traded without hurting the immediate team as much. And it might be more teams on the rise, whereas the Kings appear to be headed in the wrong direction.
Okay. I do have one last one from Congo Red. Has Baby Ryder changed your runs? Are you planning to take him with you when he's big enough?
I definitely am planning to take him with me when he's big enough. That doesn't happen until basically he has the neck strength to hold up his own head, and he can, be in one of those sort of running carriers you might have seen out there. So, still probably a couple months away from that, maybe this summer at some point. The biggest change I'd say he's had on my runs so far, though, is I used to be a morning guy for the most part, and quite often now I'm on the shift first thing in the morning with Ryder so that my partner Lindsay could get more sleep. And then I go into my work day, and then I'm running far more in the evening now than I ever used to be, just because of the way our lives are now structured. But it's actually, some days it's good. I find that some days after kind of like a either particularly busy day or maybe a bit of a stressful day, it's not bad to go for a run in the evening, clear my head, and basically I would run at any point in time to do what's best for riders. So that's kind of how things are working since his arrival.
Thank you to everyone who sent in questions for Ask CJ, which got moved to today because of a busy start to our week. Do you have a stick tap before we wrap up today's show?
Couple directions I could go. Maybe I'll go with William Karlsson since he's top of mind.
Nice.
Didn't play from November to the playoffs. Was, at one point in the mix to be on the Swedish Olympic team in Milan. That obviously didn't happen. But then not only did he miss the Olympics, he missed the next 3 months after the Olympics before finally getting back to play. And so pretty cool situation for him, and happy. Can only imagine what it's like to miss basically an entire season for a veteran player on a team, where he's a key part of what they do. And, that series is sitting 1-1. We didn't end up talking about the playoffs a lot on today's show, but it's 1-1 with Anaheim and Vegas. And I think having Karlsson back, even if it's not quite at 100%, is going to give the Golden Knights a better chance to go on a run. And, he did a lot of alone type of work. Any player that has that kind of absence, I think of like a Barkov in Florida, or, there's other obvious options, but when you got to rehab all year on your own, it's nice to see him get that payoff and return to their lineup.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a stick tap. I was going to go in the direction of Victor Hedman with the Tampa Bay Lightning. Earlier this week, a statement dropping from the social media channels for the Tampa Bay Lightning where Victor Hedman revealed that the reason why he was away from the team was because he needed to focus on his mental health. He says it was not an easy decision, but it was the right one. And at a time now where more and more players hope to be, or at least are trying to be, more open about their mental health and the struggles that they face, I always think it's brave whenever players take that step to do that. And for Victor Hedman, I hope that he's able to continue to take the right steps to improve himself mentally. We know he was missed by his team in the first round of the playoffs, but more importantly for him, just he needs to do the right thing for himself. So I think that's worthy of a stick tap. Yeah,
and I'll say Victor's one of the real ones. He's one of the good ones in the league. I've gotten to know him pretty well over the years, and I'm happy to hear that he's in a much better spot today than he was earlier this season.
Absolutely. And that's going to do it for today's edition of the Chris Johnston Show. Thank you so much to everyone who's tapped in with us, particularly this week. It's been a very eventful time talking about the Toronto Maple Leafs, among other stories around the National Hockey League. And CJ, great work as always. You can make sure to check out his coverage at The Athletic if you don't already do so. Subscribe to the podcast, whether through the SDPN YouTube page or over the different audio podcatchers out there like Spotify or Google Play or Amazon or whatever. Subscribe to the Chris Johnston Show. Leave a like or a rating, however you can, to bump that up. And we'll be back next week with more episodes and more playoff coverage and more stories as it happens around the NHL here on the Chris Johnston Show. Thanks so much, guys. Peace.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.
Hey, did you like the thing you just watched?
Was it hilarious? Was it informative? Was it me losing my mind?
Possibly. Potentially. Most of the time it is. Hey, listen, if you like what SDPN has to offer, you should check out more of our videos and subscribe to our channel by clicking subscribe, or Steve will find you.